Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey there, sweet radicals. It's time for another hopefully inspiring get-together. Even though it's technically just me talking, I always imagine us sitting together, throwing around interesting ideas and pushing some boundaries of old belief systems that do not serve us anymore. Because when we live in our heads only, then it is so hard to ever get a meta perspective on all the stuff we're sort of automatically believing or doing, simply because there are so many body negative messages in our lives all the time. So when we get together and share, there's a part of us that goes, oh, wait, there is another way of living. And we cannot help but feel the relief over the sheer possibility of liberation. The possibility to work on that, liberating ourselves instead of keeping ourselves hostage to this body manipulating narrative. Because in a way, when we're stuck in body loathing and worrying about our weight and our appearance, we lose sight of who we really are. We get so used to this new rule-based way of living that we end up becoming someone we never really wanted to become. Constantly worrying, obsessing, stretching ourselves thin, talking negatively about ourselves, checking our reflection, pinching our flesh, engaging in diet talk everywhere. Well, that's not who we were before all those layers of conditioning piled on top of our souls and hearts. There were experiences and or messages in your life, possibly very early on, that made you believe that you are not worthy just the way you are, that you needed to be different to belong, to be accepted, or to be able to be happy. And that narrative was so deep and so dark that you believed it without questioning it, which of course creates the most fertile ground for any promise to fall on. Anything that promises a way out is suddenly very attractive. It's just like with an addiction or an abusive relationship. The advertisement industry is and was clever enough not only to create fear in ourselves by making us more self-conscious, more insecure and fearful, but also to attach to it the promise of a perfect sunrise and to be very charming and tempting about it. You know, there are thousands of themes that promise a way into perfect bliss. They shift shapes and come with a slightly different bait, be it cellulite cream or the newest bikini body narrative. Whatever it is, we all fell for it to some extent. Otherwise, we wouldn't be buying wrinkle creams that don't help, or tooth whitener that destroys our teeth, or expensive labels that are currently hip, but really are nothing but that, expensive. The narrative is always the same. Something will take our insecurity, our lack of self-worth, our pain really, away. Or at least keep it at bay. That there is something out there that will make you happy. So for some it's booze. For some it's a partner that is all charming and attentive and sexy in the beginning. For others it's drugs. And for a lot of women, it's constant dieting. And the dangerous thing about them all is they do work in the beginning. They deliver. The cute guy is sexy and makes us feel desired like we never felt before. The booze drowns out our sorrows and makes us funny. The drugs take us to a different place. And the dieting keeps us running after the promise of happiness, sexiness, and a carefree life. And if at first we lose weight and we get all the compliments, there you go. That's the perfect sunshine. But as with all of those things, the shine wears off painfully quickly. The first high is gone as fast as it came, and it's downhill from there. Dieting gets harder, maintenance takes up ever more mental and physical space, and prevents us from actually living like a free person, as was advertised. And the cute guy starts being rude, inattentive, unavailable, or abusive. And instead of running from all that, we think that we were doing something wrong, and we end up forever chasing that first spot of pure sunlight that got us hooked. Hooked on the compliments, hooked on the love, hooked on the escape. It's so easy to lose ourselves in that and to stay silent in it, because there's a lot of shame that comes with all of it, thinking that it's probably just us who struggles and that we shouldn't be struggling in the first place. Because the promise was effortless, eternal sunshine, wasn't it? So we spent years putting effort into the wrong relationships, the wrong jobs, into the wrong habits, and into that toxic old narrative that our bodies should be different. Sometimes I can't remember who I was when I was not self-conscious in my body, or not just seeing flaws when looking at myself. But along the way, I came to see that all of the body hate people are engaging in, it really is a learned behavior. It's like a dialect. Depending where you grew up, you picked up a certain way of talking, and you kind of think that's something that defines you, when in reality, it could be completely different had you grown up in a different state, country, or with different people. Simple as that. We just pick up what we're exposed to, and that becomes our natural. But as we all know, we can learn a new language, one that allows us to express ourselves in a different and maybe more suitable way. Similarly, we pick up the beliefs of our immediate surroundings, and we pick up a particular narrative, insecurities and preferences, everything. We pick it all up. So they might seem like the absolute truth, the reality to which we need to conform, but really it is not at all something that is, quote, true, or something we need to keep on carrying with us. We are very much able to reprogram our brains towards a more self-accepting, body-appreciating, and non-judgmental place. But just as with every change of old patterns, it takes constant chiseling away at this old self-defeating pattern, and that can feel like a mountain we will never manage to climb. So I always have to remind myself that being in the moment is much more helpful than staring at the whole mountain from a zoomed-out perspective and losing hope. And sometimes, when we're not progressing as fast as we'd like, it's so easy to beat ourselves up and to tell ourselves that we're complete failures in this journey. But hey, just as with every journey, we need to remember that it is totally normal to pause, to look around, to take a breather, to sit down, sometimes to go back a few steps. But we're on the journey nonetheless. This is not a race. The race is the thing we're coming from. That was the race against ourselves, the race that we had been taught to race. And this journey is not a race against ourselves. It is a journey towards self-acceptance, and our inner gremlin voice, the one that has run the show for so long, that gremlin doesn't want us to allow ourselves to accept ourselves. So naturally, we have doubts about the whole thing every now and then. And that's when we need to be reminded that this journey might be the most important one we've ever been on. The one that brings us freedom. And there's no way that this gremlin voice goes away without a fight. It is not comfortable. But don't ever forget, there are so many women and men on this exact same journey, and each and every one of us would always remind you and anyone else that you are going in the right direction, even if you're scared or feeling like giving up. There's no way we're going to go back to living like a prisoner to our own inner gremlin guard. No way. And before I let you have today's conversation, I want to give a huge shout out to Rebecca. Rebecca is my newest supporter on patreon.com, the platform where creative work can be supported. And she has joined the club of my highly appreciated Patreons, the people who are really the ones that make this show possible. Because podcasting costs a lot of money and time, and with your support, I can invest all that and still eat, Thank you so much. If you're interested, please check out my page on patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. I thank you in advance. You really make a difference. And now it's my honor to welcome Judith Matz to the podcast. Judith Matz is a licensed clinical social worker with over 25 years of experience as a therapist who helps people make peace with food, their bodies, and themselves. As someone who knows the struggles of feeling out of control around food, she now specializes in the treatment of binge eating disorder and compulsive eating. Judith is the director of the Chicago Center for Overcoming Overeating, an organization dedicated to ending the preoccupation with food and weight through educational programs and workshops. She also loves public speaking and frequently presents at local and national conferences and meetings. Most of you, though, might know her from her awesome books, because Judith Matz is the co-author of 2 very acclaimed books for adults called Beyond a Shadow of a Diet and The Diet Survivor's Handbook, as well as a book on body image for kids called Amanda's Big Dream. As you can imagine, her work has appeared in countless media outlets, and I really couldn't be happier to be able to say, hello, Judith.
Hello, Merritt.
Hey, how nice to have you here. Thank you for taking your time.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm so looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, me too. There's 10,000 questions on my script here, so we'll just see how far we can get. And first things first, I think right now we're all curious to know who Judith Matz is as a person. Are you willing to share some memories of how you related to your body as a preschooler?
As a preschooler, boy, nothing stands out. I think I enjoyed being in my body, running around, playing, hopping, skipping. No worries about my body as a preschooler.
All right. Sounds like the household you grew up in wasn't all too restrictive or diety.
I've come to realize as an adult how fortunate I was. I grew up in a house with a mother who never dieted, never made negative comments about her body. So it really, what was modeled for me was pleasure in eating, nourishment in eating, and I really didn't worry or think about my body until about halfway through high school. I didn't start to have any concerns about it. So high school's where the problem started for me. And I'm a pretty small person. I'm short, and I've never been at a higher weight. So I wasn't subject to any weight stigma, any comments, anything like that. In fact, and I know this will sound funny, but it was a comment in high school from a boyfriend who said, "Judith, you're so thin," that got me to start my first diet.
Why is that?
Right, that may seem odd, but I thought, well, if thin is good, isn't thinner better? And I certainly wouldn't ever want to get fat. It was like a fear of fat. And just about all of the girls I was in high school with, they were dieting, and I felt left out. I wanted to be part of the gang. They were passing around these recipes to make things low fat, like, to instead of eating regular yogurt, to eat plain yogurt and bake an apple and add sweet and low and cinnamon to make it taste good. I mean, it was really horrible, but that's what was going on. And so between this newfound fear of fat and wanting to be part of the gang, that's what girls did. That's when I actually started dieting.
It's a sort of bonding.
Absolutely.
It just reminded me how Harriet Brown told me about her daughter coming home as a 15-year-old and telling her, Mom, I have to talk self-deprecatingly about my body with the other girls, otherwise I don't belong. They all do it. I have to talk negatively about my body as well. It's everywhere. And how shocking that was for Harriet to hear that it's a sort of bonding. And I experienced the same.
Yeah, you experienced that as well. It's so sad, so painful. But I agree, girls are taught from such an early age to connect through body hatred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I remember, it was the moment when we started looking at all those beauty magazines, and it was the time where Cindy Crawford and Naomi Campbell and Linda Evangelista and the whole, those were popular supermodels, and they were on every kind of cover page. And I remember so clearly telling myself, I think I need to look like this, and I can. I thought this was attainable and a sign of strength. And if I had enough willpower, I could do it. And we all sort of wanted to look like them. Mm-hmm. And it was like, they are so popular, and look at how they look, and we want to sort of be like them. And then it started really to be just a competition. And as you said, sharing recipes and what do you do? And some girls started throwing up, others didn't eat, others just weight cycled. And that's how it starts.
Right.
So you experienced the same, even though you were already thin.
Right. And so I started in high school, and from then on, I was trying to restrict. I remember one night my mom, she had made this meatloaf, and it smelled so delicious, and I was hungry, but I stayed in my room with the door shut, feeling so virtuous, so in control, because I wasn't eating. And of course I was starving. And so for the first time after that, I began to binge on foods. My body, I understand now, desperately needed the calories. But I remember, the flip side is I would come home from school and there would be like my mom had this thing of pink frosting in the refrigerator, and I ate the whole thing, And this went on for me through college. I would try to eat the salad bar in the dorm, and then I would binge on cheesecake at night.
Did you connect the two incidents? Because I never did. I thought I was just completely broken and had to get things under control.
It's not that I didn't connect them, but the overeating, I would see that as a failure. I broke through, and I have to go back and control. And like I said, I didn't grow up this way, and so it was really sort of odd behavior for me. I remember I was sitting with a history professor having lunch and telling him I could never eat a cookie again and not feel guilty. And I think about it now, why would I be discussing that with my history professor? But this went on for me until after grad school. I had moved to Boston with my now husband, and I was tired of dieting. I was just tired of it. And we were only going to Boston for the summer before returning to, what I'll call our real life in Chicago. And so I decided I'm going to take this summer off and stop worrying about it, stop thinking about it, enjoy my life. And I was waitressing at a restaurant in Boston, a well-known restaurant called Legal Seafood, for the summer. So food was plentiful.
How old were you then?
I was in my early 20s. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a scale. I didn't have a mirror. And I really let it go for the summer. I didn't think about it. What I realize now I did is I went back to what I used to do, which is eat when I was hungry, eat what I was hungry for. And at the end of the summer, I felt such a freedom. And I had returned to what was for me, my natural weight. And it really clicked for me that it was the dieting, the deprivation that was causing the problem. And I made myself a promise right then. I promised myself that if I ever thought I shouldn't eat something because it was too, quote, fattening, it would make me fat, that I would eat it in that very moment to prove to myself I could. I didn't ever want to get back into that cycle of deprivation. I mean, I work with so many people who have been caught in the diet binge cycle, often not only for years, but for decades. And so when I look back on my time caught in that cycle, it's very short in the scheme of what people go through. And like I said, I was very fortunate. I had something to go back to. I had grown up as what we now call a tuned eating or an intuitive eater. I was raised that way. But I think for so many people, from the start are growing up in families where there is a lot of food restriction, worry about weight. And so as they're learning to normalize their eating, wanting to break the diet binge cycle, it's often starting from scratch and really learning this brand new way of relating to your body that I didn't have to go through.
Yeah, seems like your detour was relatively short. And for me, the detour is longer than the actual way. So I was on this detour for the last, almost 30 years. And even when I was a kid, it started very early in the household. It was just all thin obsessed and diet obsessed and sick. So it's not that I do remember ever having had an uncomplicated relationship with food or even my body. There was always shame, even, in primary school when we had to, for physical education, when we had to change clothes, and it was always there. So I started to connect the dots like, wow, Merit, you were never comfortable. No matter what the weight was, it was never that I just could walk around in a bikini and feel okay. I was always so self-conscious and thinking that everybody behind me was staring at my ass in disgust, no matter how big or small it was even. So
it's such a shame because, you're talking about what you learn. Like, we all come into this world. We're not born thinking one size is better than another. Mm-hmm. And, what you're talking about is how you've learned from the messages from such an early age were to be self-conscious about your body, to not honor it as it is, to find fault with it. And I have found myself, when I'm working with people, when I'm talking with my clients, even moving away from the term body image sometimes, because I think that implies, it's up to you to fix the way you feel about yourself versus really acknowledging this idea of internalized weight stigma, that there is so much of what you're talking about in the world. It's worse than when I think I'm older than you, and it's gotten much worse in these past decades. And, it's hard for anybody. There's a lot to fight against with all the stigma out there around weight. And then we take it in and own it as our own. And, so it's not enough to decide I'm going to feel okay about myself. There's so much work to do out in the world to change the messages that you and everybody are being bombarded with.
Totally. I mean, I don't know how to put it, but it's hard to imagine having the right to live a free and fulfilled life regardless of weight. It seems like it's always connected. Yeah, I can live free and fulfilled once I am at this or this weight or look like this. And it's a double whammy considering that I never felt less free or fulfilled in the decade spent over-exercising and switching between binging and restricting. So how is that cognitive dissonance even possible? We are promised freedom and whatever satisfaction and happiness in life. But what we are doing in order to achieve that, has the opposite effect. Yet we are coming back to it and do it again and again and again.
It's a false promise, right? Mm-hmm. And, it's so complicated. And just a couple thoughts about it, when I'm thin or thin enough, then I'll be happy, sexy, successful, right? There's so much promised. And not only is that a myth, because size doesn't make or break our relationships, our interests, so many, we're so much more than a body size. But a lot of times what I see is that people then use the talk about their body to move away from other things that might be bothering them. So, like I might see somebody who's having trouble in relationships connecting and communicating. And in a funny way, it's easier, and I put the word easier in quotes, to say, well, when I'm thin, then I'll be able to date. Because then it feels like the problem is me, I just need to lose weight, and then everything will be okay. As opposed to saying, I'm a person who has trouble knowing how to make connections. I get anxious when I talk with someone, or I'm afraid of intimacy or whatever it might be. And the problem is that our culture, what you read in a magazine or what your family or friends tell you, often concur with that. They collude in that, like, yeah, lose weight, then you'll feel better, right? And so people really get stuck in this, I need to lose weight to feel good, when it isn't even about the weight. It's about dealing with other kinds of issues. So that's one part of the complexity. Another thing that I think is important to think about, Merit, in terms of what you're talking about, still never feeling good, at what point, how do we embrace the idea, I am enough? In this body, I am enough.
How do we? It's an important question because I had the idea or the expectation that once I could, just make an affirmation, then it would sort of reprogram my subconscious. But it's not enough to tell myself that I'm enough, or it's not happening overnight, sadly. But how can we do this? It's like trying to come off of alcohol in a bar. We are surrounded by luring messages that want to get us back in the cycle and just try one more time. And it's everywhere. And even our girlfriends talk about it. It's everywhere. So it's really hard to just believe something that you maybe never, ever believed before. Namely, you are enough as you are. That's really hard. That's like Galileo saying the earth is round and people went, kill him. Yeah.
But over time it became accepted. Yes, the earth is round.
But not during his lifetime, sadly.
Well, I think it happens. As you say, of course, doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. Is it a journey that somebody gets to the end and says, yes, I feel comfortable all the time in my body? I think, most people will say, I feel better in my body. I can feel strong in my body. And still accept that there's a vulnerability, that there are still going to be moments where they might struggle. But I think creating communities, which you've been doing with your podcasts and your information, this is the antidote to all the negative messages out there. Our podcasts like this, articles, blogs, Facebook groups.
Connection,
stories, listening to stories, reading and reflecting. And I think the work, each of us are unique. So how we travel that path is going to look different for everybody. But I think the work gets done both from inside and from outside. So from the outside, reduce as much as possible those magazines, the women's magazines that say you're not okay the way you are. Get out of the Facebook groups that are talking about weight loss. Reduce as much as you can your exposure to the stigma out there. It doesn't help. And find the communities that give positive messages around body size, the health at every size message. And I think then for some people, also, there's doing the internal work. There's looking at what other issues the body may be carrying for them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that as my therapist self, that sometimes I work with people where some of the distress around their body has to do with issues beyond just appearance. And so it's, like I said, it's complicated. It's an interaction between so many different levels, so many factors. And it's worth the work, right? It's worth it.
Totally. I'm working with a therapist as well. And what starts to become really clear is what everybody says in the books. But I start to realize that it's actually true. It doesn't make me come over the fear easily, but I see it. It's not really about the body or the food, even though it totally feels like that. Totally. The fear is totally related to that. But as I work with her and see what's going on, I realize that the fear that comes up isn't really about that. It attaches itself to that because it was my weakest spot all along in my life. So it kind of hides in this body image box. But when we really put the lights on and look at it, it's much, much, much more fundamental, the fear, like acceptance. It's a fear of not belonging, of being left behind, which is an existential fear. And it relates to the trauma I had as a kid, which was terrible. But maybe that's the same for others as well. It's the basic fear of it will be revealed that I'm not enough. Everybody will be able to see that I'm not enough. As long as I can hide and, weight suppress and people will not take notice of my body being quote unquote flawed, I might not be recognized as a fake or as a imposter or whatever. That's the basic thing. We are afraid to be recognized as failures.
Right. I think you've put that beautifully. And, again, that idea that in your own work, you've learned so much about what your body holds for you. Mm-hmm. And then and this is why I love doing this work, because every single story is different. And there's things that, people who've been caught in the diet binge cycle, there are things everyone has in common. There are things I know about people's stories just by the nature that they've been caught in that cycle. I know about how the restriction works and the breaking out of the restraints works. But then there's these deeper, complex issues. So for you, you're learning more about the fear, the sense of belonging, all the trauma, all the meaning. For somebody else, it may look completely different, that the reasons they feel bad in their body have to do really with just society's messages. You know what I mean? There's such a range. And because I also want to make sure people never assume that everybody struggling with body image has had trauma, right?
Yeah, no.
And yet many people who struggle with body image have. So we want to be able to hold that there's so many possibilities and honor each person's stories and their needs in how they make the journey.
Yeah. I heard stories about people who, for them, it turned out to be that they suppressed, sexuality, that they had not been living according to their own nature.
Living authentic.
And for others, it was being stuck in a relationship that didn't work. For others, again, it was being in a job or in a totally unfulfilling environment. It's about something different for everybody. And I do think that we do have things in common, as you say, which I want to talk about your book, of course. And it's a good segue now because there's so many things, even just the word survivors. So I want to just tell you, thank you. You and your sister writing the book Beyond the Shadow of a Diet and the Diet Survivor's Handbook. I love them, and I'd love to talk about some of those handy lessons that you're describing in the handbook. But
Sure.
Before we get into that, let me just, go on a little tangent here. How is it, as a woman without a sister, of course, I want to know how it is to write a book with a sister, especially on a topic like that.
Well, it was fantastic. Ellen and I are very close, so I'm really fortunate to have a sister that I feel so connected to. The first book we wrote together is Beyond a Shadow of a Diet, which was intended for professionals, mental health therapists, dietitians, other health professionals, because in my experience, so many people have seen therapists who themselves are possibly caught up in the diet binge cycle. So the majority of therapists are women, and women have this experience that we've been talking about around their bodies. And so I'd get people coming to me who'd seen 6, 7 therapists and had good therapies, but had never been able to deal with the eating and body issues. And so there was a point where I had some ideas. I wanted to really write for therapists, but I didn't have a lot of time, and Ellen had more time. And so we decided we would collaborate together. We've both always loved to write. And so we did that for our first book, and then again for Diet Survivor's Handbook. And so we put aside every Monday and Friday morning for a long time. We would get on the phone. We would write different parts of it, or, had different tasks. And, it was a combination of working on the books, but you can imagine 2 sisters getting off on other things, our family life and whatever else was going on. So it was wonderful support. It was fun. We laughed a lot, and we just loved writing together. It was great to have this project and the support of our family as we did it.
Yeah, and it seems like, as women, almost every woman I know has gone through some sort of struggle with body and body image and the whole thing. So I guess it's great, having a sister and being so open to the sister, being open to whoever is close to you, really, and telling them, I've been doing that, I suffer with that, I have an issue with this. And seeing that, okay, maybe she has a similar issue, or okay, she knows what I'm talking about. And then even being able to write about it together is amazing.
Well, I should add this. Ellen is also, we're both clinical social workers, and Ellen has a long history of working in the eating disorder field. She was doing that before. She's my younger sister, but she was working with eating disorders before me. And when I was doing some postgraduate work, and I was on the eating disorders team. That was what was the most interesting thing to me. So that's when I started doing some of this. And during that time, just to earn some money, I worked with the OptiFast program. So you might remember the liquid fast.
Oh my God, yes, of course.
Yeah. So I am embarrassed to say, but I learned a lot from doing it. I saw people invest incredible amounts of energy, time, and money and lose tremendous amounts of weight only to gain the weight back. And really, that was the breaking point for me of saying, I can't be doing this anymore. I need to go a different direction. And I have to say, Ellen was doing the non-diet work before me. She had already reached those conclusions. I think she was a bit appalled at when I was working with OptiFast, and not a bit, she was appalled in the 1980s, and we would have these conversations and these arguments. So I was the one who came around to it actually a little bit after her. So we had always shared this professional work in the eating disorder field. Like I said, I was a little later to the party in terms of understanding the importance of quitting diets and becoming an attuned or intuitive eater. So it made good sense for us to work on this together. And she has her own story about how she got to this work, the eating issues and body. She struggled more than I did as an adolescent with it. So working together, our common interest, our common bond around it, really, we were both so happy to be able to do this together.
I totally see that. And the term survivor in the title of the book is really striking. And I think we touched on it a little bit. It starts making sense more and more why you chose the term survivor. Did you pick it because you knew about eating disorders and how hard it is to kind of give up something that everybody else seems to be doing? Or why did you choose survivor?
Mm-hmm. We chose it, our definition was that if you've been on one or more diet, lost and regained the weight, and are becoming aware that the failure is not your fault, you're a diet survivor. And we wanted to give credence both to the damage caused by diets and to the empowerment when people actively reject them and the courage it takes. Mm-hmm. It takes courage to quit dieting in this culture. It's hard work. It is not easy to go against the grain and say, I will not diet anymore. So again, recognizing that because you've dieted, it has created harm that you are overcoming, and to empower you that you are not alone and that you are actively doing something that takes great strength.
Yeah, and for that to be, really heard, for that message to really be heard for people, it's important to know about the fallacy of diets. I could talk about this 1,000 times, and I think it's important to repeat it so that every new listener maybe has a new insight. How would you describe the inherent fallacy of diets to someone who hasn't heard about this before?
All right. Well, I guess I'll do it by describing how this diet binge cycle works. Nobody ever looks in the mirror and says, oh my gosh, I look terrific today. I think I'll go on a diet, right?
No.
Instead, it's, my stomach sticks out, my thighs are too big, I don't look healthy, all of these negative thoughts. And so the person concludes, I better do something about it. I better go on a diet. And this is what I mean when I said earlier, when somebody walks into my office, I already know so much about what they've been through, even though each story is unique. Because what happens next is the person picks from any one of the hundreds, thousands of diets out there. They may count calories, they may getting rid of gluten is popular these days. There's all kinds of diets. And all of them work in the short run, right? I mean, in the short run, you're likely to see weight loss. So the person feels good. They feel in control. There's this virtuous feeling, almost like a high. I've done it. This time I'm going to make it work. And what happens is that as they're feeling this confidence and maybe they're losing some pounds, they start getting compliments, right?
That's a very big part. It's like a drug, yeah.
Yeah. And so the person goes along, for a month, a few months, but sooner or later, physiological and psychological factors kick in. And, physiologically, the body sends out red flags saying, I need more food. Our bodies, think of our ancestors way, way long ago. They lived in times of feast or famine. And the people who survived are the ones who could store fat. And so, when you go on a diet, besides losing some fat, you lose some muscle. But what you gain back is fat. And so metabolism changes over time. Set point changes.
Because the body cannot differentiate between, she's going on a diet, I'm going to play along, or this is a famine, we need to prepare.
Absolutely. But I also think it's so important for people to understand psychologically what happened. So, like when I do workshops, I will say to somebody, I'll say to the participants, let's say that starting tomorrow, you could never have ice cream again. What are you going to do tonight?
Ice cream, ice cream, ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. And the answer is always the same, that people are going to eat ice cream, whether they're hungry for it or not, and they're going to eat way more than their body needs. So that when the person who's on the diet, who is on the one hand feeling in charge, starts to physiologically feel pulled toward food, psychologically feels pulled toward food, sooner or later they break out of the restrictions. And when they do, they are not running for salads and apples and carrots, right? They're going for the very foods that they've forbidden. And so typically those are things like the sweets, cake, ice cream, cookie, candy, maybe pizza, other foods. And then what happens? well, the weight starts to come back. But I think this is the most insidious part of the diet binge cycle is the shame people feel. Because first it's like, I'm not okay in this body. There's something wrong with me. And so I've been a good girl or a good person. I've done what I'm supposed to do. I've followed my diet. And now I can't follow it anymore. You know, people blame themselves. I have no willpower. What's the matter with me? And as the weight comes back, all those compliments people got before, now there's silence. And it's incredibly painful. Incredibly painful.
It's a very loud silence as well in our head. It's like, yeah, they're probably talking behind my back.
Right. And so that shame, I mean, the effect on the psyche, and then what usually happens is then somebody goes along and says, I better do something about it. And the whole cycle repeats itself. So to be able to say, I am going to get off that cycle, right? That is brave. It takes strength and courage. And that's what we mean by being a survivor, to say, I'm not going to put myself through that anymore. I get it, that the diet cycle is sapping away my well-being, right? Yeah. Physically, psychologically, yeah.
Problem is that most people don't even realize that this is a cycle. I certainly didn't. I only saw, the benefits, quote unquote, of the diet. I lost weight, got all the compliments. And the rest, I didn't put that in the same category. Diets and the effects of dieting, I totally took the blame for the weight coming back on. So in my head, it was the diet was a good thing because it worked. And whatever part it was that didn't work, my binging or the regaining of the weight, that had nothing to do with the diet. That was solely my fault.
Right. That was your fault. And again, what's so seductive here is that, remember when we talked about the diet binge cycle, we were saying they do work in the short term. So because you get an initial result, when it doesn't work further down the road, you assume it must be my fault because it worked at the beginning, versus really understanding how you are set up from the beginning to fail. And that's why the tagline for the Diet Survivor's Handbook is, you haven't failed your diet. Your diet has failed you. Yes. And that's what we need people to understand.
Yeah. I mean, even though it happens to like everybody, it seems to be that everybody blames themselves and probably doesn't. I certainly never talked about it. I tried to keep my dieting more or less a secret. Like I wanted to be effortlessly skinny, right? Who doesn't? I certainly didn't talk about how hard I tried and how much I was struggling. And now when it all comes to light, how many people are doing that and from diet pills to eternal dieting to lifestyle changes, whatever it is, how is it possible that something that happens to literally all the dieters, except those that end up in horrible throes of an eating disorder possibly, how is it possible that something that doesn't work for almost everybody is still considered a personal failure for the individual dieter?
Right. Ellen and I, when we were doing workshops together, we would use the example, I think we might have it in Diet Survivor's Handbook, like if you're a woman and you went to your gynecologist and asked for birth control and your doctor said there's a 5% chance it will work.
Yeah, you wouldn't take it.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you would be outraged, right? If that's what they were trying to offer you. And yet, people keep going back for more. I think that there's more acknowledgement that diets don't work. I think people are catching on. But the problem, is that then people say, well, I'm not dieting. I'm doing this for my health, or I'm doing, they call it so many different things. And so my definition is that anytime you're manipulating food for the purpose of weight loss, that is a diet, right? And so, the key is for people to start figuring out how to have a relationship with food that honors and supports their bodies. And if weight loss happens as a side effect, we're not against weight loss per se. It's the pursuit of weight loss that's the problem.
Yeah, and there's a lot of denying and self-denial also in this whole thing. That's why people resist it so much, I think. When I try to talk about this to someone who seems to be totally in the diet thing, like over-exercising and eating not enough, then I get met with this snug superiority sort of, Like it's hard to even get through to that person with this message because they're so invested in this. And there's a lot of denial. They're not dieting. No.
It's a threat. Like if somebody's really in it, and especially if they're in the phase where it's in a sense they feel that it's working, then your message of saying, hey, this isn't healthy or diets don't work is really threatening to them. And I think the other problem, Merit, is that people don't know what to do instead. You know, the diet mentality, we were talking earlier about how you and I were raised as eaters. And, you know, you were saying that all your life you've been raised with a diet mentality. So it's really hard, you know, when somebody says, okay, diets don't work, to figure out, well, if I'm not dieting, what am I going to do instead? Because for most people, it's either I'm on a diet or off. So not dieting can sometimes feel like chaos, right? So if the dieting is rigidity, not dieting can feel like chaos. And what's so important, what I do so much teaching about in my books and workshops and working with clients, is finding a place of what I'll call balance or integration, where you're developing an internal structure to guide you in deciding when, what, and how much to eat.
Yeah, and it probably takes some chaos, I believe, in the short term.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that initially there's going to be times that feel chaotic. Again, gets back to how everybody is different. Everybody's journey is different.
Mm-hmm. What I could really relate to was how you described that for most people, giving up dieting feels a bit like giving up on themselves. It feels like that for me, even though I cognitively totally realize what I should do. There's a pretty strong force inside of me, probably subconscious, that really doesn't want to let me give up this. And it kind of throws all the catastrophe thinking at me, what's going to happen, it's going to be really bad, and it's going to blow out of proportions, and nobody's going to love you, and stuff like that. That is really, really hard to overcome, and it feels like the disguise is like you're giving up on yourself. So it's hard to just stop it, even if you have the message that diets don't work. It's like, but I cannot give up on myself that easily, you know? That's probably how steeped we are in diet culture, that it's either this or giving up on yourself. How can we deal with that?
It's so interesting because, again, just like we talked about this with body, it's true in people's relationships with food. There's so many different stories that people have. And so, you know, what you've been, you know, talking about today is your very deep, really lifelong struggles. And that's absolutely the case for a lot of people. At the same time, I'll have people who come in who actually in a fairly short amount of time, you know, like they already know what hunger feels like, and just the permission to listen to their hunger, like that it's okay if you're hungry for a cookie to have a cookie. You're not a bad person, and it doesn't mean that you're going to eat cookies the rest of your life. And they experiment, and over time they find, wow, that feels better. And they're able to integrate that and use it and, you know, find that the attuned eating really feels so much better physically. It feels so better emotionally. So somebody who can get it that quickly, that's sort of I don't know if I want to say it's an exception, but it doesn't happen that frequently. But I'm just saying that it's so different for each person. So I want people listening to this to know your story is going to be yours, and it may take you a really long time, and it may actually come pretty quickly. From my perspective, the place to start is one eating experience at a time. So, you know, are you able to identify hunger? Some people know what hunger feels like from the start, and other people can spend a really long time figuring out hunger because, again, there's just a multitude of reasons. For some people, hunger was dangerous growing up. They had food insecurity. I had one client I worked with where her parents were rarely around and food would just run out of the house. And there really was not enough to eat. There wasn't enough money to buy food until a check came. Well. Yeah. And so just feeling hunger was terrifying. And a lot of the work was to figure out ways, because she's in a very different, you know, financial situation now, to work on the idea that she had the means to make sure she would still remain comfortably fed. So the meaning of hunger is different for everybody. What it means to make a match. You know, there's so many, that's why I love doing this work. That's why it's so exciting, because every client I work with has a different story and the path will look different, even though the skills I teach are the same.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you find diet survivors have in common?
Well, all of the people I work with have gone through those feelings. I'm not enough. I'm going to go on a diet. I break out of the diet. I feel shame. I diet again. For some people, there's also an emotional aspect that we've been talking about, how food gets used to manage some other kinds of feelings. But something I want to say diet survivors have in common is the relief they feel when they realize they don't have to diet anymore. It is very freeing. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be more struggles like you've been talking about, but there is still this incredible freedom. I've had clients say to me, I used to run a group, and they would say to me, why aren't people breaking down your door to do this? Because they were feeling so much better. But the answer to that, why aren't they? It goes back to everything that we've been talking about, that it is so hard to make that decision in this culture, given the pressures to be thin.
I would think they have the knowledge in common that they see the pattern of diets not working, and they have permission to face the fact that it was never their fault and that all the shame that they suffered wasn't really theirs to have because it was the fallacy of the diet, and that there was a pattern all along. They just felt alone, and it felt like the only failure there was.
I think part of what you're getting at is that people develop compassion, passion for what they've been through and what they continue to go through. But like you said, I am not alone. This wasn't my fault. In the Diet Survivors at the beginning, we also talk about, the cycle of grief. The people go through stages of loss.
We got to give up a dream, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and a way of relating to yourself. It's a big change. So sometimes people...
denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit how it goes. So sometimes it's the denial, like, all right, let me do one more diet, lose the weight, and then I'll do this.
Yeah, right. Or let me just try this lifestyle thing.
Right.
Good. That's denial.
Yeah. Sometimes there's the anger, and anger can be focused back at society, at their families for pressuring to lose weight, which I think is a pretty healthy thing to do, right?
I have that.
To feel angry.
Also, yeah, right. Why do I have to go through this? Why is diet culture so strong? Why is every girl talking about this? Why did I start this? It's like an angry, I can use it creatively and do this podcast. It's also,
exactly. Right. So a lot of people, and again, this isn't, for some people, this is a very private process, letting go of dieting and reestablishing a normal, healthy, satisfying relationship with food. For other people, it empowers them in a way that they want to go out in the world and share what they know. So like people like you, and there's a lot of people now doing podcasts, writing blogs, all kinds of amazing energy out there around this from people who have had their own revelations, and that anger gets used to both help their own process and help others, and actually is part of the process of reaching acceptance, right?
But I think I'm stuck at the bargaining stage. I recognize the behaviors in me. Like I eat more and I allow some fear foods. And then I start recognizing, the pressure inside of me to exercise more. So I kind of bargain. Yeah, but I don't want to gain too much weight. No, and maybe if So it's a sort of a bargaining stage. You describe it as the third stage of grieving or of loss.
Yeah, I also want to say that the stages, although they're listed in order, aren't necessarily linear. You can go back and forth, right? So you may actually have times where you do feel a greater sense of acceptance and you're okay with yourself and your eating patterns. Yeah. And then something happens that kind of throws you, back into the bargaining. So, I think they're useful to kind of reflect where you're at, how you're thinking about letting go of diets, but I wouldn't see it as, okay, I'm here and then I have to get to here.
Okay.
But to see it as a much more fluid process.
And that it's all a part of things. You're not doing it wrong, but that everybody feels those different feelings. It's actually a good thing to point it out like that. Yeah, and I don't know if you remember that on page 11, you cited an article that was printed in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1998. So very long time ago, almost 20 years, with the title Losing Weight, an Ill-Fated New Year's Resolution. And I mean, that also makes me angry to see this knowledge was around all the time. And we just, it never came through to us. Big media and the diet culture and everything made sure that we never knew about this. And I don't know if I should read it for my listeners. It's really striking. It says, there's a dark side to this national preoccupation, since many people cannot lose much weight no matter how hard they try, or they promptly regain whatever they do lose. The vast amounts of money spent on diet clubs, special foods, and over-the-counter remedies, estimated to be on the order of 30 to probably 100 until now, billion yearly, is wasted. More important, failed attempts to lose weight often bring with them guilt and self-hatred. So that's built in as well. Interesting. Mm-hmm. After all, even overweight people are likely to share common prejudices about themselves as lazy, undisciplined, and self-indulgent. To add injury to insult, the latest magical cures are neither magical nor harmless. Until we have better data about the risks of being overweight and the benefits and risks of trying to lose weight, we should remember that the cure may be worse than the condition. And that was 1998.
Right. We've known for a long time, and it is a shame that people are still being told by their doctors, healthcare professionals, to go on diets. First do no harm is a major ethical principle. Unfortunately, I think many of their healthcare professionals are also experiencing the harm of diet culture. So I think that's
internal fat phobia.
Right, their own fear of that. Yeah, we still have our work cut out for us, but the work goes along. And I think, what I love about doing the work I do is that I can work on the social justice issues out in the world, and then work on people's own individual needs and dynamics. And so that's, in the Diet Survivor's Handbook, what we try to do is give people those 60 lessons, like break it down into, here are steps you can take to get out of that diet mindset, to break the diet mentality so that you can honor your body in all these different ways. When it comes to eating, when it comes to physical activity, when it comes to good self-care.
Mm-hmm. I want to go into some lessons after that, but I'd like to stick with weight discrimination and general body shaming for a second here. And as a precursor to that, I need to tell everyone listening that I, as a reasonably smart person, do not remember getting the memo that bodies naturally come in different sizes. And I say that just to show that this is not what we are being taught. I mean, I wasn't even aware of my internal belief. I wasn't even aware of the belief. I just grew up with the idea that we all have this ideal weight, roughly the same for everybody, and that it was a matter of discipline to be or stay at that weight. And my body felt like a traitor for apparently wanting to be at a higher weight. So I figured it was broken and declared war. And it seemed like the thing to do since everybody did it. And the underlying belief is that we all should be equally sized. So it was more or less understandable what I did. And then for a discussion about weight discrimination to fall on fertile ground, I think it is always important to see that we have been gotten a false idea. And you write, quotes, the idea that everybody can attain a certain level of thinness is preposterous. And I'd love for you to go into some more detail here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the exact quote is from the book, but one of my favorites in our book is, even if we all ate the same and had the same level of physical activity, we wouldn't all look the same. Mm-hmm. I mean, where do we get that idea that somehow all bodies should look alike? We're different heights, we have different hair color, different eye color. Genetics plays such a strong role in determining what our body size will be. And like you said, that doesn't get out there. And
no, we don't even question it. It was so deep for me. It was just a given.
And I think I want to say, it's hard to change our ideas. That's what you're talking about, and that's what people are diet survivors. We're really trying to change how we think about dieting, how we think about body size, weight, how do we accept size diversity, that people naturally come in all shapes and sizes, the thinness that what gets put up by models is, I think it's achievable by about 5% of the population. And so it is preposterous to try to fit ourselves into that. I think it's so important generationally to be teaching our kids, right? Mm-hmm. From birth, how do we start to tell kids, your body is right for you? Everybody looks different. It's supposed to be that way. I was doing a talk. I think it gets a little bit at what you're talking about. I did a presentation. I was asked to speak to a group of parents of teenage girls. It was some big conference. And as we were talking about things parents say, like, just comments like, I ate too much, or, oh, these jeans don't look good on me. Like, what do your kids pick up, right? And we were then talking about some of the ways to counteract that or how to respond. And this one mom said something, I just loved it. She said her kids in her family, everybody is a higher weight. Like, that's just how they're built, right? And so when they're together, it's really clear there's different sizes. And what she says to her kids are, this is what's normal for us. And I just love that. It was like such a simple statement, but so affirming. Like, this is what's normal for us.
Yeah, and it seems outlandish to a person who has never heard that before. I certainly would have, a few years ago, when I wasn't even aware of that, it's just so built in that it was, as I said, a given. And I heard this great example with dogs, the analogy with dogs instead of humans. And right. I heard, I don't know, would you try to make a beagle have a body like a French bulldog just because they are roughly the same height? And don't you think a Rottweiler would have to be really, really sick to look like a greyhound? Mm-hmm. And that kind of clicked and stuck because it really doesn't make sense just because they're all dogs. Have the same race. They're dogs. They don't have to look the same. Like no apple trees look the same. What have we gotten ourselves into thinking that we should all kind of look the same?
Right. When we were updating Beyond a Shadow of a Diet a couple of years ago, I came across this great research study, and I won't get the details exactly right, but they took, as usual, they used college students, but these were identical twins, right? And they put them on a restricted calorie diet and no exercise. And what was so fascinating is that everybody lost weight, but there was a real range in the amount of weight everybody lost, but it was the same for the twins. Like each set of twins basically lost the same amount of weight, but it might have been 15 pounds different than a different set of twins. And then when they were weight restored, the weight gain was the same among the pair of twins. Am I saying that in a way that makes sense?
Yes. It ties back to the genetics.
Yeah, it goes back to the genetics. So we really need to be teaching, modeling that people come in different shapes and sizes. And that's why, I don't know if you're familiar with the children's book I wrote, Amanda's Big Dream.
I've not read it.
Okay, so yeah, it's about a girl who wants a solo in the spring ice show, and her coach, as happens often, makes a comment about weight. Oh, if you lost some weight, you probably could do better and get lower on your sit spin. And this girl who's been raised without any shaming about her body gets thrown into a tizzy, gets worried about her weight, and it goes through how her parents and her doctor and her friends support her. But it really is meant so that parents can have a resource to model to kids that kids naturally come in different sizes, and that the message really is about building confidence in your own body and doing what you can with your body and doing your best as a skater. Not everybody has to have the solo in the spring ice show. Maybe she gets it, maybe she doesn't. I won't, go over the ending, but...
Yeah, why don't we have different shaped skaters? I mean, that's another entire story. Why not?
It's an interesting thing in some of the fields. Certain body types can perform differently.
Yeah.
So, but I can't tell you after we published Amanda's Big Dream how many stories. I got heartbreaking stories from people who were adults reading the book saying, oh my gosh, this is my story. I love skating and I was told I was too fat to be a skater, so I quit. I mean, how sad is that? Not everybody has to be a competitive number one ice skater. Skating is fun. Learning to do the jumps or spins is fun.
Yeah.
Body size shouldn't be what the reason a coach or parent says, don't bother.
And I think that's why this is the most important thing to know, to have a solid foundation, to even, realize how much weight discrimination that there is in our culture. Without this knowledge, you can't be aware of it because you have this sort of, they're just not trying hard enough. And once you know that it's not about that, then surely I think in a kind-hearted person, there must be the urge to fight weight discrimination. I can't imagine any different. And I just realized that sometimes it happens very overtly And sometimes it comes so subtly that it's hard to detect, even for me. And still, there are people in this world that either deny or even defend weight discrimination, saying, no, we have to shame them into, quote, better behavior. I don't know what kind of thinking they are basing their arguments on. So my question to you is, how can we help people become more aware of the different ugly faces of weight discrimination?
If only there was an easy answer, Merit, to that.
You're right.
I think one aspect you touched on is that people have such a strong connection, between weight and health. And so it literally frightens them. They're frightened by the media and by, healthcare professionals that if I let this go, I'm going to be sick and die. Well, the truth is, health is a continuum, and we all eventually are going to get sick and die. There's no way around that. But I think educating people about things like the obesity paradox, about ways one can take care of the body.
Health at every size.
That promote health at every size. And there are so many great resources out there. So, I love writing articles. I think that's one of the best way to educate people. It's, with social media, it's easier to get things passed around. Last year at this time, I wrote an article called 8 Reasons Why I Don't Want to Hear About Your Diet, just to help people be supported in their decision not to diet when this time of year everybody's talking about it. But it also addresses some of the health issues. And, we know, and I imagine at this point many of your listeners know, you can't ascertain the health of somebody just simply by looking at their body. Mm-hmm. There are thinner people who are healthy and unhealthy, and there are higher weight people who are healthy and unhealthy. And like I said, health is a continuum anyway. And so it's really hard to shift the paradigm. And in some ways, we do it one person at a time. Maybe somebody's hearing your podcast for the first time and gets interested and reads Diet Survivor's Handbook and learns more about health at every size. And I think of each person as being a pebble that creates a ripple and spreads it out in the world. And so, we have to keep it on, with the good work here.
You do. And what you just described is one of the lessons I wanted to talk about, because as you mentioned, the Diet Survivor's Handbook has in it 60 lessons to help us step out of the diet torture chamber. And I really loved 26 because it says, do not equate thinness with health. And I think it bears endless repeating because, I was prone to believe that. Once I read about this, it was like, oh my God, of course. I was never unhealthier when I was so skinny. I lost health and I couldn't deny that. And for me, it was like obvious. I was healthier at a higher weight. I cannot deny this. And so it fell on fertile ground, if you will. I started seeing this is you cannot equate the two, and people didn't see it. People still complimented me. So no, we cannot tell anything about a person's health just by looking at them. And I'm glad you devoted a lesson to that in your book. And another lesson that I really liked is 13. That's a hard one for me because I don't know if you know about that. When you're such an experienced dieter, it's hard to forget the diety knowledge that I have. So when re-allowing fear foods, my hat sort of involuntarily comes up with the photo memory of the nutritional facts that I once read on the back of said food, and it's a killjoy. No matter what I touch, it's like I have this photo memory of knowing what's in it, and it's kind of hard to just forget it, or we probably can't forget it. And then you say, in 13, you say, create abundance for yourself. And that's a mind boggler. Would you elaborate a bit on that lesson?
Sure. When we're talking about reestablishing a healthy, satisfying relationship with food, one of the keys is to eat foods that satisfy you in the moment, right? So when you're dieting, you're picking foods based on what you should and shouldn't eat. So you may choose something because you think it's a good idea, like, something typical would be a salad. I'll have a salad that's not too many high in calories. It's healthy for me. And nothing wrong with salads. Salads can be great. But if you need something heavier, a salad won't satisfy you, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that we have people, when we say, think about what will satisfy you, who have a long diet history, don't even know anymore what will feel good in my body. Like they've just lost that connection.
I relate to that, yeah.
So that ultimately is what we're after. Like, when you're hungry, making a choice that will leave you feeling sated, that you'll feel good afterwards. Sometimes you go, oh my God, I just need a steak and fries right now. And you just know exactly what you need. And other times you may not be so sure, and that's fine too. And it's not like there's always just one perfect food. So sometimes I think about what's a good enough fit, what's a good enough match. But the problem is when out of your diet history, you feel afraid to eat certain foods.
So you can keep them in the house even.
And your experience is that once you start eating them, you'll never stop, right? So in the beginning of the non-diet movement, this idea of what was called stocking bins, if we're talking about creating abundance, just meant that you start to bring foods in your house in a way that gives you full permission to have them. So as I talk about this, I want to qualify it by saying it's really based on the idea that people have the means, have the financial resources. Some people, we talked about food insecurity before, some people are living in situations where being able to get enough food to just nourish their bodies is what matters. And so the idea of bringing in a bunch of extra stuff just isn't a possibility. So I want to qualify that this is just one strategy. Sometimes when I work with people, I'll say, what's a food you binge on? And let's say somebody says chocolate chip cookies. And I'll say, okay, well, imagine, what's your favorite kind? And they tell me their favorite kind. Imagine, how many boxes would you need to feel like they'd never run out? And they tell me a number. And I say, okay, well, let's double or triple that. And, just think about what would happen. And they'll say, well, today, how many would you eat today? Well, I'll eat a box of cookies. Okay, and tomorrow, yeah, another box. Okay, well, let's say you go back to the store and you buy a couple boxes. What about the next day? Well, maybe I just want half a box. And the next day, I'm kind of getting sick of them. So the goal is not to make anybody sick of any particular food. It's just that when you have something available all the time, scarcity makes us anxious, right? Mm-hmm. Just like your favorite band is coming to town and it's the hottest ticket in town, or where I live, Hamilton tickets. Everybody to play Hamilton. And so when the tickets went on sale, there's all this anxiety, right, about am I going to get tickets? And you're thinking about it constantly, and it creates anxiety. But now imagine the show's been here, it's 10 years later, and everybody's seen it, and it's just here all the time, and there's always tickets available. You calm down, you go on the day that works best for you instead of having to pick a time that isn't really as convenient, right? So if you get what I'm saying, scarcity makes us anxious, abundance makes us calm down. And so really all this is about is permission, that once you give yourself permission to have these foods and you start to keep them around, people typically find they lose interest. But again, there's a lot of caveats to it. You have to really mean business. You have to really mean that no matter what, I'm going to always have chocolate chip cookies in my house. If you say, I'll try this for a couple months, but if I'm eating them, I'm going to take them away again, you will overeat them the whole time. Does that?
Oh, right. I didn't know that because I thought, if it doesn't work, then you just throw them out.
Yeah. But if the message is at some point the deprivation will be back, then you're going to get them while you can. So in general, what people do is maybe pick one food, again, I really follow what feels right to people. So sometimes, let's say there's one woman I'm working with, she's a mom with a lot of kids. So actually she always has sweets in the house, but she never gave herself permission to have them. They were for her kids. So for her, it's like, okay, I'm going to continue to have these, but now I also have permission to eat it when I'm hungry. And then what I spend a lot of time helping people do is look at when I eat it, how did it feel in my body? And how do I want my body to feel? I mean, everybody gets to make their own decisions about that, right? Everybody gets to choose how they feed themselves. So if somebody says, I had chocolate chip cookies and I ate them, but I felt afterwards I felt sluggish. I had too many. Then I'll say, well, what would have felt better? Well, it actually would have felt better to have X number. So that's what's important. It's not good or bad that they overate them. We're not judging. We're just using each experience to say, this is how it felt in my body. I like the way it felt, or I didn't like the way it felt. And notice, this is so important. The diet mentality is all about I was good or I was bad. Mm-hmm. Right? What I want people to think about is this felt good or this felt bad. The same food can feel good on one day and can feel bad on another day. So if somebody says with the cookies, eating this amount felt bad, this is what would feel better, then the idea is to bring that awareness to the experience next time they're eating cookies. Now, again, the reason the abundance can be helpful to people is that it's a commitment to saying they're never going away. So how often have I heard, and I'm sure you've heard people say, well, I ate the whole box of cookies because that way they wouldn't be there tomorrow, right? But when you have abundance, there's more than you can eat. That would be the key, so that you can't make them all go away at once. And so at some point you have to make an internal decision to stop, an internal decision. And you know that if I stop now and I'm hungry for them in a few hours or tomorrow or the next day or next week, I can have them again. Again, I want to be really clear that we're not saying eat whatever you want, whenever you want. That's a misinterpretation of this. That is not true at all. This is in the service of helping people eat what they're hungry for when they're hungry, and just get to the point where foods don't glitter. They don't call out to them. So that after a while, people kind of forget, I have all these cookies, because they don't need to remember it until they're hungry for a cookie. And people start to say, yeah, I don't need to buy anymore. They just get stale and I have to throw them away.
They kind of legalize the food again, right?
Right. Again, this is something I want to acknowledge the privilege in being able to do this and being able to spend money that you're not on food that you're not going to end up eating. Some people who maybe can't afford to do that have found like they can bake a lot, that's a less expensive way, or when something goes on sale, they buy it. And for other people, it's just not an option. And for some people, they don't ever choose to stock. They just really work with this concept of permission, but they still start to bring it in and to keep it around as they feel ready. You know, again, I'm not saying everybody has to run out immediately. Somebody might say, I feel like I can bring in the sweets I'm fine with, but potato chips, when they're around, I eat them all, and I'm not ready to do that. And maybe at some point they decide they're going to bring them in. Maybe they get to where, you know, when they're ordering lunch at a restaurant and they want some with a sandwich, they want potato chips, it feels fine. There's no right or wrong way to do this. So I wonder how that sounds to you in terms of clarifying this idea.
You totally clarified it. And you also had a way of saying all this that kind of tied into lesson 31. And between the lines, all you said was, there's no right, there's no wrong. And we have to kind of speak kindly to ourselves, as opposed to, oh, you shouldn't have eaten those, or you had more than you know you should have. You can't stock them anymore. Obviously, you suck at this and it didn't work. Or so you kind of encouraged us all to be kind to ourselves and observe what's going on and how we feel, which is a totally non-judgmental way of being, which goes against all that we learned or all that we did in all the years that we dieted. And in lesson 31, you say, talk to yourself like you would talk to your best friend. And I heard that so many times, but in the very moments this lesson would be important, I somehow don't have it handy. How can we learn to really do that when we spend years and decades, talking to ourselves like a hypercritical correctional officer? It's hard to switch, especially in those moments that we need it most.
Well, that's exactly correct, Merritt, that people have developed such harsh, judgmental ways of talking to themselves, and it is hard to switch. So that's why we say, talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend. Because even when I've heard your podcast before, or I see what you write, you are so kind, so gentle, so compassionate. Like, you know that language, right?
Yeah, to others, now, it's so easy.
To others. So now you need to turn that on yourself, what we call self-compassion. And I would encourage you, it's like there's two parts of you, right? There's part of you that's caught in all the negative, judgmental stuff. But now take whatever that part is saying, that's just one part of yourself, and connect with another part of yourself and ask that part, if you heard a friend say that, what would you tell her? Find those words. Find those words. And then after you have found them, you could imagine a particular friend. You can imagine your younger self if that's helpful. But I think for you, probably imagining a friend or what you would be saying to the community that you're part of. Once you find those words, then try to bring them back to whatever was bothering you, to yourself. And practice that over and over and over. I've worked with people who really can't find the words. It's an exception, but sometimes that happens. But I know that's not the case for you because I know how you speak to all of us.
You got me there. Yeah. It's just, it seems like such an indulgence. Like my late mother's voice comes into my mind when she says, "This is not a fucking holiday here," you know? She had an expression that was obviously Swiss German, but it's always like, yeah, we have to suffer for things. And
self-care and self-compassion is never an indulgence.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to be the key. Everybody says that, and that's why I try and learn this more. But sometimes it's just harder to do, and it feels like, what are you doing? This sugary blah. And on the other hand, I start to realize more and more that the gremlin voice never was helpful. It was very successful at shaming me, but not really in making me any happier or healthier. So it's time to just try another plan.
Right. Well, to speak back to that voice, what was it? This isn't a fucking holiday.
Yeah, like, we have these kids camps where you can go and have a good time, ride ponies and have fun with other kids. And it was like, it's not a children's camp, like it's not a party here. It's not, you can't choose.
What would you say to a friend who had been told that? If you heard a friend saying, "This is the message I got," what would you say to her? I'm putting you on the spot.
It does something to me physically, and I have the urge to, first of all, hug the person and say, "I'm so fucking sorry I had to go through this."
But that's enough right there. I think that's a beautiful response to, in your mind, give yourself a hug and say, "I'm so sorry you had to go through this."
Because I went through terrible stuff, and thinking that if someone else told me my whole entire story in all its details, I'd probably just, want a hug. I'd probably be at a loss of words even, but I wouldn't torture them on top of everything. I mean, that's absurd. Yet we do torture ourselves on top of everything on a regular basis.
When we wrote Diet Survivor's Handbook, we hoped to be that compassionate friend, that book that you'd keep on your nightstand. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes people read it right through, and if you're new to the non-diet work, it can also actually be kind of overwhelming. It's a lot to take in, let me say it that way. And so what I find is people go back to the lessons over and over and over and experiencing them differently at different parts, different points in their life and in the journey. But again, keeping that on your nightstand, being able to use the book as a best friend. Of course, it helps to have good friends, community, therapists, places to go to process whatever are the issues unique to you.
Yeah. On your website, judithmatz.com, I found 3 wonderful words in big letters saying, "Imagine the freedom."
Uh-huh.
And these words somehow resonate on a much deeper level than just the rational mind. Imagine the freedom. How would you describe the liberty that awaits those who work through the program with you, or who are working with you, or with the Chicago Center for Overcoming Overeating? How would you describe that liberty?
Well, it's why I love doing this work. Every time somebody, makes the connection that they don't have to diet and feels that freedom, it is just lovely to witness. And the freedom takes place on some different levels. Anybody out there who is dieting knows how much energy that takes to constantly be thinking, am I going to eat this today? Am I not going to eat it? Is it going to be a good day, a bad day? It's depleting. It drains our mind of mental energy. And so when you let that go, you're free to think about and invest in so many other kinds of things. So that's part of the freedom, not to mention rediscovering pleasure in food, that food is both nourishing and pleasurable, and being able to go out for dinner and order something that you'll really enjoy, be a guest at somebody's house who's serving you something that you love, to cook foods and bring foods into your own pantry. I just saw a client, who said this is the first time of going through the holidays as she celebrates Christmas, that she just enjoyed it. Like, she just had fun, and she went to things and she ate what she was hungry for. She didn't end up she felt great. And it
no punishment with exercise. Yeah.
No, it made everything so much more pleasurable. But there's also another level to the freedom. We talk about how attuned eating leads to attuned living. And I think that's part of the freedom too, is to be better connected to yourself through your relationship with food. You start to notice you have needs. Those needs are specific and they can be met. And when you start to live your life that way, from a place of attunement, there is a lot more freedom.
Probably seen what other areas of life you've been dieting, emotionally dieting in a relationship or in a job, or how you were restricting your life, basically.
Right.
It all ties together. That's what I'm starting to find out.
So there's the focused work of quitting diets and reestablishing that satisfying, healthy relationship with food. But it's so much more than that.
So if people want to work with you or ask you something, how is it best to contact you?
It's best to go to my website, judithmatz.com, and on it I have information about my counseling practice, about my speaking events, as well as there's a speaker sheet if you're interested in having me come to your organization. There's information for the media, and there's also a sign-up sheet for our quarterly newsletter that you can find on the website. So that would be the best way. My email address is judematz@gmail.com, and people are welcome to contact me directly that way as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
Exactly.
So it's already time for the question, and that's, what would you like to be remembered for?
Oh, boy, that just about brought tears to my eyes for some reason. I've been doing this work since the early 90s, and it really matters to me. It matters that the counseling I've done with my individual clients, the books I've written, the articles, so I've done some webinars, now some more podcasts, that people hear it. And I hear from people that, boy, didn't expect that. I hear from people that it changed their lives, that it was transformational. I couldn't ask for anything more, to have work that I love and that's really made a difference in people's lives.
Thank you for your emotions, and thank you for your kindness. It's palpable. It really is.
Thank you, Merritt. I've so enjoyed talking with you today, and I appreciate being on your podcast.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe, and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.